Hello, everybody, and welcome to Wickersoft's webinar series. We have a very popular and compelling topic for you today, resource scheduling and capacity planning for a project online. My name is Mike Otranto, and I'm a strategic account specialist at Wickersoft. I'm also joined on today's webcast with Jim Patterson, who leads in a business development role. The line will not be open for questions, but feel free to use the chat feature. Anything we don't get to on this webinar will be responded to via email. We'll be including our contact information at the end of the webinar. If for some reason you get distracted or pulled away during the webinar, no need to worry. I will be emailing the recording and the slide deck of today's presentation. I will now hand off the webinar to Jim Patterson. Jim?
Thanks, Mike. Appreciate the introduction. This is Jim Patterson, also with Wickersoft, and today our topic on resource scheduling and capacity planning for Project Online. In it, Wickersoft is excited to introduce OnePlan for Microsoft Project Online. And OnePlan adds simplified top-down strategic and portfolio planning to the already strong PPM execution features already built into Project Online. And OnePlan just enhances the capabilities for resource capacity planning, which we're focusing on today, but also adds some things for financial planning and portfolio visibility and analysis across the enterprise as well. But today we're going to take a look at OnePlan and how it enhances the capabilities for resource scheduling and capacity planning in Project Online. So with that, let's get started. We're going to do a little bit of discussion on resource management overview, on the resource management topics and different dimensions of that. We'll talk about OnePlan for resource planning in Project Online and what it brings to the table. We'll spend a good chunk of time on an actual demonstration of seeing it all in action, and then we'll finish up with some summary and some next steps and some special offers for those of you that have attended the webinar today. So with that, let's get started. And what better way to start than with kind of a resource management 101 definition, and it being as defined as resource management being the efficient and effective deployment and allocation of an organization's resources when and where they are needed. So very high level, but when we put those things in place, and people do it in a variety of methods these days, if at all, and the benefits of actually doing resource management is providing the requisite visibility so we can manage things appropriately. We can increase business value by making sure we're putting resources on the right things at the right time. We can save time and money by putting the right resources on at the right price and the right costs to make sure that we come in under budgets that we have, whether they be internal or client-facing projects. It can also help us increase project success rates because we can then make commitments based upon our true availability or let's say wherewithal to apply resources in a project management and work management context. We can also accommodate demand better, meaning we can properly assess demand and requests that come in and properly time scale or time phase and approve or reject work efforts and projects based upon the resources that we have, as well as maybe even look at ways to contract or hire additional people to meet the demand. And then just overall employee satisfaction by not continuously overburdening resources with unreasonable workloads and commitments on the project side of things, which happens when you don't have the requisite visibility. We can get definitely an increase in the employee satisfaction dimension of keeping resources within our organization. Some of the resource management challenges that people see, and this is just a subset of things that we see out there in the marketplace. But resource ownership, especially in matrixed organizations where we have project managers and resource managers, and you have to negotiate for those particular types of resources that you need at the right time. Resource focus, meaning do we have the right focus on the resource dimension side of things? And do we have resources focused on the right things at the right time? Non-project workloads. Our ability to deliver projects in a project management context is often dependent on what other non-project workloads the resources that we depend on have, and do we have visibility or factors in there to determine whether or not we're actually putting a realistic project workload on those resources. Resource tracking, do we have the mechanisms in place to say, even though we've planned our resources, how are we actually utilizing those resources and spending that valuable resource time, and do we have to make adjustments based upon the actual experience? Overall resource visibility, meaning do we see at any given point in time what's on people's plates, and as project timelines shift, the actual picture of what a revised forecast might look like based upon actual experience. And another piece is when people are doing resource management, say in spreadsheets or other methods off to the side of where they're actually managing the project schedules themselves, The manual reporting of mashing up that data and interspersing it with project and portfolio management data is often a very labor-intensive process that becomes projects in and of themselves. And ultimately, because resource information in projects is very granular, it can be very granular, and it can be, and it's also generally time phased over different time increments out over a planning or actuals horizon. Oftentimes we end up with too much data to make sense of it. And how do we boil that down and turn it into useful information? So those are just some of the challenges we see from a resource management context in organizations today. When we look at some of the key resource management steps, the things that we need to go through, and some of this is aligned with resource management maturity of your process within your organization. But if we look in the lower left, capacity planning is usually the easiest place where people can start, and that's going to be the focus of what we're talking about today. Capacity planning is really at a high level saying we have these initiatives and we have these resources, and we want to at a high level determine who we need to assign to what, possibly on an FTE basis or on a percentage basis of allocation at a very high level, so that we can do some headcount and labor planning based upon what we're going to need to actually execute on the things that we've actually committed to. When we talk about resource allocation, that's really getting down to saying, all right, I've allocated somebody to this project from a capacity planning perspective, but then when we start managing schedules and get down to specific work items and tasks within those projects, how are we going to allocate the resources we've been given to the detailed elements within those plans and then deliver on those things and complete them on a timely basis? And resource tracking allows us to do that, allows us to capture things like what we've completed as far as work efforts, actuals if we're doing time reporting and need to understand what that is, maybe if we're having to report billable hours, say, to an external customer. And then just overall team management, where we're actually working with teams moving forward and the team dynamic getting better by actually having people gain efficiencies by working together on an overall team basis, and that sometimes happens even more so in more agile environments where we have dedicated teams. And then just overall work management, and this is where we're incorporating the context of all work, not just project work, into the mix, and basically taking a global view that looks at the context of maybe our unstructured operational work in tandem with our project work, so we can get a complete picture of resource demand and a plan for how we're going to actually utilize those resources over time. Other dimensions of resource management are things that we may want to consider. In the top, we look at roles and resources. Sometimes folks do resource planning in a very generic way by resource roles and resource types, you know, a developer, a business analyst, etc. And then ultimately, maybe that's good for early planning, but then ultimately you're going to have to decide what resources specifically are going to fill that role in a particular project. So the idea of what level of granularity from that perspective you're going to plan to. Planning and tracking granularity. Is it a very high level, you know, this resource on this project, or is it down to a specific resource for a certain number of hours or percentages of their time on an individual task? How you're going to manage that is a consideration based upon the maturity that you have and the ability of your organization to sustain that in an accurate way. Approvals and negotiations. If you have a matrixed organization, you may have resource assignments that actually serve as requests from a project management organization to a resource or functional management organization. And that negotiation needs to happen so that you actually get actual people to fill those roles on those projects at the times when you need them. Governance and prioritization. As you have an intake process and as you start contemplating the resources that need to be on those projects, do you have or want to have a process where you prioritize and align these things with your strategies and basically make sure that these resources are working on the right things at the right time? Forecasting versus actuals. Some people just simply plan out projects and want to track the actuals to see where they're being spent because maybe they have to build those things, charge them back internally. But also folks may want to forecast and they want to plan so they can see what they're intending to do based on certain assumptions and then track versus those actuals. Some folks do one or both, but the idea is you have to determine for yourself where you're at and what you're willing and able to do and what you'd like to have available. And then also resource costs. Resources that you apply to projects do have costs associated with them. And do you want to track those based upon resource rates and basically look at that from a cost or budgeting perspective? So just some things to consider as you're looking at the different opportunities to get a better handle on and mature within your resource management disciplines. Now, the Gartner Group has a chart on resource management maturity, and as you'll see in the early stages, in that crawl stage, notice that as you look at what's in there, the bulk of that is really in that red, which is resource capacity planning. Define high-level project roles and staffs and prioritize projects and programs to make sure they're the right things that are there. The detailed resource allocation is a minor part of that based upon where you're at on the maturity curve. And if you're at that lower level, you probably aren't going to move into more detailed allocation of resources until you're in a later stage, walk stage or run stage within the solution. And the idea here is that you want to align yourself with an honest assessment of where you're at any given point in time. So resource management must, once again, assess your readiness. The idea is let's be truthful with ourselves and understand your organizational maturity and start from a place where you think you can sustain it. You definitely want to grow the organization and stretch the organization, but you don't want to put more rigor than the organization is able to absorb at any given point in time. Understanding the environment, meaning the culture and the organizational landscape. And as you start, maybe even from a low maturity spot, build a resource management roadmap of how you'd like to take this organization from that early crawl or lower maturity stage up to whatever stage of maturity you'd like to get to from a resource management perspective. And like anything, define the process you'd like first, and then let's model it in the tool sets. The idea is the tools are enablers that allow us to do some things and automate some things. It makes it easier for a adopt process, but it doesn't define process in and of itself. So how do organizations manage resources today? Well, surprise, surprise, most organizations that do not have a comprehensive solution in place are using Excel spreadsheets. And why do they do that? It's because it's freely available. We all know how to use it to some degree, and sharing and sending around files or putting up on a file share is pretty easy to do that. Just because it's accessible and we know how to use it doesn't mean it's ideal. The problems with Excel is that there's a lack of standards. It's very individual in the way that you plan these things. And if you have different spreadsheets for different business units or departments, it's a manual process sometimes to roll those things up together. It's also a very manual and static model, meaning that as you build it and things change on a time phase basis, for example, projects move and change, those things need to be changed on a cell-by-cell basis as they go on through. And in complex resource spreadsheets, by the time you finish something that you think you're happy with, it's probably already somewhat outdated and then needs to be updated again. And it can be a very manual cell-by-cell, row-by-row process. The other thing is it's very easy to break formulas and calculations in spreadsheets. More hands that get into those things can get deleted very easily and affect your roll-ups and your calculations as you go on through. There's also no dynamic visibility of resource capacity, meaning the calendars and the availability of resources, not just what we're tracking as far as what their demand is. It's not easy to get both of those elements into a spreadsheet. And it's very time consuming when things change. The real problem is it's disconnected typically from other project management information like your schedules, right, and other aspects of the portfolio. So the idea is having it as a separate artifact that's really not connected in any way makes it sometimes a situation where what we're looking to do from a timeline perspective doesn't jive with what the assumptions are and how we're going to allocate resources and when in those projects as well. So the idea is to keep them in sync and in the same solution. Just general visibility, insight, and overall reporting is once again that manual mashup process that we talked about. And once again, there's really no governance and workflow built into this, as well as the ability to do real strategic alignment of projects to company objectives by looking at the resource dimension as well. So if many of you have gone through the pain of doing this in Excel, we have some options for you. And let's look at some transformative options that are available to us. What I mean by transformative, let's embed these resource management processes into an overall solution. Let's make them part of a central data store where the resource management dimension or component is just one dimension of the overall project and portfolio management information set that we have. And then provide actionable intelligence in a form and format that's meaningful and that we can interpret without having to pore over lines and lines of a spreadsheet data and kind of go through an eye chart process as we go on through. Now, Project Online is designed to be an end-to-end project and portfolio management solution, of which resource management is a key component. And it does have its own native capabilities for things like capacity planning with resource engagements, detailed resource assignments, which most people are familiar with Microsoft Project, where you assign resources to detailed tasks and roll up that information. There's also a timesheet capability in there so that you can capture actuals from people on what they're actually working on as they're executing on the projects. So the idea is that this is a component within the portfolio management, project management, resource management, and just overall project collaboration pieces. And our focus today is on that resource management dimension. But if we look at all resource work from a project perspective, you have to look at both the high-level resource engagements, which can be that high-level forecast very early on, but at some point you're going to have some detailed idea of what people are going to be working on and detail to support execution if you want to have a total resource requirement. Now, given the maturity level, like we talked earlier on, people may start with just those high-level forecasts and track to those just so they have a good sanity check of whether our commitments can be actually met given the resources we have on hand. But to do this well in a mature fashion, you have to look at both levels of this to get a total resource requirement picture. Now, by adding OnePlan into Project Online within the actual pages or navigations within Project Online, you can actually do visual resource capacity planning, first of all, within individual projects. So when you're within a particular project in the project detail pages in Project Online, you can actually do fast, simple, visual resource capacity planning for teams, people, equipment, or any resources that you're working with on a availability basis. And you can dynamically manage resource demand with drag and drop capabilities. You can match individuals to the project's requirements by finding team members according to their roles, skills, and availability. And you can also have heat maps, so we can already see where people are over and under allocated based on the context of this project and just all work they have overall. So you start within this high-level capacity planning even before you even have anything like a project task in a schedule. You can actually do this at a project level, at a very high level, and we'll show a little bit more about that in the demonstration. And then ultimately, by doing this on a project-by-project basis, we can get resource planning and visibility across the enterprise. We have the high-level capacity and demand at a resource-centric level by looking at a resource pool and then looking at the resources proposed and committed across all the project work and efforts in the solution. It's easy to substitute and balance resources with drag and drop capability or with simple replacement functionality within the solution. So the idea is we can get not only visibility, but the ability right here in the browser to do balancing of our resources across. And then visual resource scheduling for folks that need to take this even another level further. Rather than a resource on a project on so many FTEs or such a percentage basis, you can get down to a real engagement level where you say, I need this business analyst to gather business requirements at a high level for 2 months over a schedule, over a particular project. And the resource scheduling capability within OnePlan allows you to do this fully synchronized with Microsoft Project Online, its resource engagements capability. The other piece that's in there, it adds some team member collaboration. So even though we're doing these high-level resource plans and schedules, we can get feedback from the resources as requested by the project or resource manager so that they can get online collaboration and status going on back and forth between the different parties right within the solution here in Project Online. The other piece is, if we have an easier way to get our resource capacity and demand information into Project Online, we can actually then leverage that more easily now to look at the resource constraints in the portfolio analysis capabilities in Project Online. So by using the portfolio analysis and using resource constraints, we can come up with a portfolio that's doable based upon the resources we have. And we can also look at things like, what would it take from a contract or a hiring position? What would we need to do all the projects that are at our disposal if we have that as an option with us? And the idea is we can do various scenarios that not only factor in the resource constraints, but we can also factor in budgetary and cost constraints as well. And then the other piece here is OnePlan does have more top-down financial planning capability that it also adds within Project Online. And the reason that's important is you might want to have line item financial planning, both from a budget, forecast, and actuals perspective. You may have detailed cost categories about labor and materials and travel expense, et cetera, whatever you track. And the idea there is to be able to track this and then have it roll up to the portfolio. So not only do you have high levels of what's budgeted, what's forecasted, what's actual, what's remaining, you actually have line item detail capability available for you when it's needed. And many of our clients and many of the people we see out there have a desire for this. And the benefit here is that, for example, the labor pieces, then the financials from them can actually be derived from the resource capacity planning information that you do in that resource capacity plan. And with those resources having rates associated with them in the central resource pool, which is fully synchronized from Project Online or fully integrated, the idea here is that resource capacity planning can derive labor costs for you right within the system, all in one step of doing that initial resource planning. Once again, making it more easy and streamlined to go through this process. And then just the dynamic resource reporting and analysis. Because of the fact that Project Online data and because this information is all synchronized within Project Online, the idea is that this is being available from your native OData feeds out to the reporting that's driven by Power BI. And so we can actually slice and dice through insights on capacity planning, on actuals, and other resource information as we're going on through our project and portfolio management process. So end to end, from early on capacity planning as we're contemplating projects, selecting the right projects, and then executing with this information both from a plan and actuals perspective, gives us the ability to do really anything we'd like to do with more browser-based, easy, visual, graphical types of user experience. And the resource management use cases that we typically see is one where there is a matrixed organization, where you have a project manager would basically determine a named or role that they need for a project, and that would serve as a request. And that would be a proposed type of allocation that would then get reviewed by a resource manager, and that resource manager would then edit, approve, or reject, or swap that generic resource request for a named individual based upon the availability that shows up on this in the system. Also, some organizations have the ability where the project managers get people dedicated or allocated to them, where they can just go in and allocate those people on a more committed basis and have that done streamlined, and then give that information to the resource management organization so they know who's being allocated where, and they can keep their finger on the pulse of what that situation looks like on a day-to-day basis. So with that, let's get into a little demonstration of the solution. So here I'm looking at Microsoft Project Online, and for those of you that are not familiar with Project Online, it is a project and portfolio management solution built in the Office 365 cloud. What's nice about this for folks that are using Office 365, which is a great number of people these days who are either in it or in the process of moving to it, Project just becomes a part of your overall Office 365 experience. So whether it be your email, your OneDrive, your OneNote, your Word, PowerPoint, all this, Project just becomes, if you enable this for folks, it gives them their project and portfolio management capabilities right within their Office 365 user experience. So as we come in here and as we look at this, we're in a project center that has our portfolio of all our projects in here. And as you drill into any one project, you have the details regarding those projects. So if I drill into this social networking integration project, and I go into the project detail pages, just like you would see the schedule, you would see go to the project site and the typical things that you would do to get to the details of that particular project as it's been configured for your organization. Notice that OnePlan is now made available within these project detail pages, right natively within Project Online. Here, what I'm looking at is for an individual project, a resource plan that's being built and can be done in a variety of ways that are particular to you. Notice I have resources, both generic and named individuals, that are available to me over here. Notice on the right, I have an allocation on a time phase basis. In this case, it's monthly, and I'm looking at budgeted values. Notice that I can actually do this by hours, percentages, or full-time equivalents. I like to use percentages, so I'm going to leave it at that, but it will calculate and render this information in those increments to you anytime you like. We can also do this resource planning based on what we're budgeting, but we can also look at revised forecasts, actuals, and even track some benefits later on if we want to in this. But the idea here is that we have a lot of flexibility on the resource types and the time phase horizon, and the ways that we want to plan this information going on through. We can also change the horizon here in the date range. Notice that I'm looking at this and things in months, but I can also do things and just quickly say, let's look at this in quarters. And I can go in here and look at this from a quarterly basis or an annual basis. Or I can, if I wanted to, I can go back to a monthly and then just say I don't want to change the time horizon. So I want to change this out to maybe 2 years as opposed to a year, whatever it might be. The idea is that we can keep that horizon and then look at this stuff in any way that makes the most sense for us. Now, adding a new line item to this resource plan is very easy. It's fully integrated with Microsoft Project Online Centralized Resource Pool. So let's just say I was going to add a tester in here. I would simply go in, say, let me add a tester. It would make that available to me in here. And it looks like I already have it in here, but the idea is if I was doing a generic resource or a named resource like Kono, it would bring up any resource that is in the named resource pool so I can add that line item in here. Notice that when I have, it tells me that it's already been added. That's great. The idea here is that when I go into this particular tester, I can then update the percentages as I see fit. So say I need 25% of this resource within here. I can type that information in and escalate the time that I need for this particular resource over time, and then go on through that as it makes sense to do so. Now, this is very spreadsheet-like, but it's tied into an overall central repository of project and portfolio information. Also, if you don't want to just add a line and go through the spreadsheet process, you can use something very similar to the resource engagement process in Project Online, meaning I can click a button in here, and I can actually then just enter a resource name like a tester, pick that up, and then I can go and say, I need this resource from October through December for a couple months. And then as I go on through, I can then say, give me a percentage of allocation, like the 25%, or I could say how many hours per month if I want to do that, or if I did percentage allocation, it'll calculate those hours per month. It will also then calculate the total hours based upon that allocation. So what it would do is then fill out this allocation across this time phase instead of me actually having to do it cell by cell. Once again, all things there to help you streamline the resource allocation process as you're doing your capacity planning. Now, if you want to see what these resources are working on in conjunction with everything else, not just within this project, I can quickly add the resource availability pane. And then down below here, for example, I can look at Daniel Williams, and I can see that actually he's working on 2 different projects right now, and he's essentially part-time on both of these projects, which means he's still essentially within his allocation realm within most of these cases. So as you can see, I can change things. I can drag and drop. For example, if I look at the project manager stuff, I could actually take these things and I could take things that were generically assigned to a project manager and just drag it to a specific resource. And I'll do that more when I show you the more global view as we go on through here. Now, ultimately, you can choose whether these are proposed or committed allocations. And as you can enforce that as part of an overall resource management process. The other piece that you can do is to choose, as you're doing your planning in here, you can do your preliminary planning and it'll save that information automatically, but it will not make it public for general consumption until you choose to make this resource plan public. And the idea there is you have some control of when you release the information on what you're working on, giving you some good granular control there. Now, as we get out of the realm of being, say, a project manager focused on an individual project, we can go and look at overall capacity in here with the same OnePlan capability, but looking at it more globally across the organization. If I look at this, notice the same kind of things. I can plan in hours, FTEs, or percentages. I got the same budget forecast or actuals. I can do the same date ranges or planning horizons. But notice I have a more resource-centric view here with a full centralized resource pool. In that, I can do a variety of things. I can actually sort and group and filter these things by different elements. So for example, I added role as a piece of metadata around this in the resource pool, and I've decided to sort this by role so all my business analysts come up here together as we look at this particular view. Now, if I come in here, I can see that Grace Williams looks to be pretty well over allocated. And in that realm, I can come in here and look and say, what's Grace working on? Well, it looks like she's essentially full-time on 2 different projects. So looking at that, it definitely makes sense that, that Rose has an issue. Now, what I might want to do is then find a candidate to give this other work to. So for example, if she's maybe primary and integral on this iOS app here project, maybe the VoIP phones project is something that we can offload to somebody else. And with this view, as I'm looking at their other business analysts, I can come in here and I can see that Hatim doesn't really have any allocation. He has some availability to work on this. So I can simply, from a resource management perspective, drag this VoIP phones project down to Hatim, and now it brings it down to his realm where we got something that's more doable with him than it was with Grace. And the idea is we can do this type of drag and drop capability anywhere across this. Now, if we're going to look and do some other resource substitution and see who might be available, we can open that resource availability pane here once again. And as I go down and look at this, I can look at this and sort and find resources by role, whatever. So I can come in here and say, let me find these by role. And this could be defined whatever metadata or the ways you want to classify your resources coming on through here. And the idea here is that I could simply say, well, I have a generic business analyst up above here, and I have this cut cost project that's in here. I could actually find a resource that's available in here like Patrick Sands, and I can simply say replace resource, and it will go get that resource based upon me looking at more global availability down below. So we can either drag things from one place to another, or we can search for availability based on different roles and do a searching process and find available resources and then do a simple replace to do all that process. Once again, simplifying the resource planning process and making it more dynamic. Now, as we go through here, also be aware that we can do resource scheduling. So rather than just at a project level, we can take this down to another level of detail, if you so desire, optionally. Notice in this group, I have the same resources in here from the resource capacity planning. But notice, for example, I've got Daniel Williams, who's the project manager. And if I zoom this to say months, we're down at a weekly granularity, which is a little too granular. But let's go down to months and notice that he's in a manage project function within that project. So it's specific as far as a high-level engagement, not a detailed project task. And notice that I have a generic developer that needs to develop solutions, but I haven't given it to a specific individual yet. So for example, I can go down to a developer down here like WoFat, and I can say, let me drag this develop solutions engagement down to a specific individual here, WoFat, and now his allocation is now given to that, and we simply have taken this generic assignment and given it to a specific developer individual. Once again, some folks, the capacity planning we saw on the grid earlier on is sufficient, but for folks that want to take it to another increment of detail below that, they can do this resource scheduling down at an engagement level as well. Another key piece in here is the financials piece. So as we go through here, OnePlan also includes and is fully integrated on the financial side of things, such that you can look at the plans from both labor and costs associated with your different cost categories, track your CapEx and your OpEx very well, and also have the same type of cost types, as we'll call them. So for example, I'm looking at a budget and I can fill in the grid here based upon the budget. And we talked about the resource plan potentially filling these costs based upon the rates that are there. So you're not doing it twice. The resource planning could fill the financial planning need from a labor perspective from that resource capacity planning. Also notice that I can do comparisons in Heatmaps. So for example, if I want to compare budget to forecast or budget to actuals, et cetera, I can come in here and at any given point in time, I can look at these same categories and I can see, oh, I'm within budget here, but I didn't budget anything for the tester, but now I've got costs associated with it. So I actually have a negative variance based upon the fact that I didn't plan for this originally. Or here where I actually budgeted for it, and I actually have actuals that are a lot more than what I had budgeted. So I get very good financial information that's dovetailed or tied very nicely to the resource capacity planning that we've been doing. Now, when we start allocating these resources at this high level, it's synchronizing with Project Online real time, such that when we go in, do things like the portfolio analysis capability here within Project Online, we can basically come in and look at a scenario. So for example, using the portfolio analysis capability, when we look in here, notice that I say if I don't hire any more resources other than what I have, based upon the candidate projects I have, I can only get 70% of the value of the project based upon the resource planning that's in there, our capacity to deliver resources, and the timelines that we have in here today. Now, we could actually modify this in a couple ways. We could stagger the dates of the projects to accommodate more within here. But the way it is right now, with no additional resources and no timeline relief, there's 4 projects that we can't do. Now, this is all based upon the resource requirements details that come in, and OnePlan streamlined the way that information can get in here. So by looking at that, notice that I have the generic resource roles and types, all on individual project basis as we look down the details down below, but it's summarized up there where our bottlenecks are based on the timelines. Now, if we go back and look at the scenario, and we go through, one way we can look at this is to say, what if we could contract or hire additional resources? And I could come in here and say, what if I could hire 3 or contract 3 more resources and recalculate this scenario? It'll recalculate that, and what it does is it tells me now I can get almost 77% of the value of this portfolio, and it actually moved 2 projects in that I didn't have in there before. And now I only have 2 projects that aren't making the cut. So the idea there is, what do I need? And this project will, the system will actually tell me what resources I need in order to make this scenario work. It looks like I need 3 developers. I need 1 on this new customer success program, and then I need 2 developers on the Windows 7 compliance project in order to make this scenario work. So once again, I'm getting a good sense of capacity versus demand, aligning with the company's objectives and priorities, and making sure we're putting the resources on the right things, and making sure we're making commitments based upon the resources that we have or that we're willing to apply to the particular projects themselves. Ultimately, the reporting and using this stuff in a way that is usable information and being able to do good analysis is going into the report side of things. And if I look at the reports that come out of here, what's nice about this, all the things that are feeding from Project Online and being fed into there by OnePlan is flowing through to Power BI for reporting. Now, we're rendering these reports right within the Project Online or Office 365 pages, and a report like this becomes a natural output of the process. You're not having to build these reports or these PowerPoints each time you have a reporting cycle. Notice here one report, I'm looking at a resource dashboard that's showing me capacity line and the demand, and I can see as an organization across all roles, I'm well within the demand. But what if I wanted to focus on a particular position or role? Since we were talking about the business analysts, let me look at those. And as I look at the business analyst, I can come through here and I can take a look at, let me go through this report here. I can look at, I'm just going directly to Power BI for this particular report. And then notice that if I go and look at the position and role and I say, give me the business analyst on this, it's now focusing down on the specific information on a time scale for this particular business analyst role. It tells me who is the most overused or overabused resources in here and allows me to focus on those things. And also gives me information on things like utilization, with more detailed capacity versus demand information, or maybe even a high-level availability chart, which I like because as I'm looking to put different roles on here, it can tell me who's available and what roles I have readily available to me, and I can actually drill into specific roles and take a look in, say, for example, down in the, say, the QA role. I can look at specifically who's available and what their availability is over time. So once again, getting this as a natural throughput is something that's important because it's a very time-consuming process for many organizations today. So with that, let's go look at some of the summary and wrap-up as we move on through. So in summary, resource management really is a critical success factor for overall PPM success, and that the approach and processes should align with your organizational readiness and maturity to have success early on, and that you can build upon that. High-level capacity planning is a good place to start because people seem to have an easier time adopting that as a starting place rather than more detailed granular allocations. And the more detailed resource allocation can follow as you're ready or as needed based upon the needs of the organization. Now, Project Online provides a great platform for all your PPM capabilities end to end. But Wickersoft's OnePlan extends and provides enhanced visual planning capabilities in a more graphical, visual, browser-based capability that makes it easier to get that information in. And OnePlan is fully integrated, embedded in Project Online, not just from a user perspective and the tool perspective, but fully integrated at the data level and also at the resource pool level, so that we're working with the same sets of resource information as we go on through. Now, Wickersoft, just a little bit about us. We've been around since 2002. We were founded as a joint venture with Microsoft. Microsoft is actually a part owner of our company. But we are a strategic technology partner for Microsoft, and we have a global footprint across the globe, and we handle a variety of different applications and solutions and services. We have 5 gold certifications, of which project and portfolio management is one of them. Collaboration and content and cloud productivity, cloud platform, and messaging are things that we have gold certifications in. Much less than 1% of Microsoft partners can say that they have that level of gold certification within their organizations. And if we look at that, we can be a one-stop shop for the things that you want to do. Obviously, we have business applications and IP, things like OnePlan and our OneConnect are things that are technologies that we bring to the table to enhance Microsoft's offerings, but we have the full consulting services that allow us to help organizations get the most out of their investment in Microsoft technology, like Project Online. And we actually configure these things to model the business processes and get the most out of them. We have all the education and training you would need for these solutions so that adoption is successful within those organizations and people are properly enabled. And also we have staffing services. So if resources is one of those things that you're short on and you have short-term needs for things like project managers or PMO consulting and other things like that, we have the staffing services that you need, as well as we have some clients, we actually administer these systems for them as a managed service if they're constrained or don't have a PMO in place. And we offer PMO as a service for many people. So the idea is think of Wickersoft to be able to fill the gaps that you need both from a technology and a services perspective. And we talked about how we're doing this in project portfolio management in Microsoft Project and Project Online today, but we also do the same things across the Microsoft Cloud. We do agile portfolio management within Visual Studio. We do general SharePoint digital workplace and work management capabilities within SharePoint. And in the Dynamics 365 realm, we help with things like professional services automation and field service management. Notice the thread here is all about work management. Project and work management is our forte. And then all of it really feeds through to Microsoft Power BI and comes to us from the Microsoft Cloud. From a next steps perspective, if you're interested or your interest is piqued by what you saw today, please talk to us. We can offer you a free discovery/assessment and give you a roadmap of what it might take you to get from your current point or where you're at to ultimately get into this solution at some point. We can actually even offer, if you're at the right stage of decision making, we can offer you a Project Online and OnePlan trial with Wickersoft chaperone support to guide you through that to have a successful experience rather than just have you poke around on a trial and error basis. And I gave you a very general demonstration today. If there's something more personalized based upon your requirements and your landscape, we'd be happy to schedule a one-on-one demo specifically for your organization as well. You can contact us at wickersoft.com. Contact us at wickersoft.com is the email, and our website has a number of different pieces of information. We have our general Wickersoft website at us.wickersoft.com. We have a Project Online specific area called project-online.com, and then there's a subset for OnePlan specifically out there if you'd like to see that. You've heard about this webinar because you're here today or you're registered. And if you go to us.wickersoft.com/webinars, we have a whole list of our upcoming webinars, as well as a very deep library of prior recorded webinars on a variety of topics on the things that we're doing today if you're interested. So feel free to do that. Hopefully, we've gotten your questions answered along the way that came up in the chat panel. And if we missed any along the way, we'll review those and respond to you individually via email after the fact. So I'd like to thank you all for your time and attention today, and please contact Wickersoft if we can be of assistance moving forward. Thanks and have a great day.